those minority-led small businesses. So in addition, they've set aside some money for the smallest of small businesses, those with 10 or fewer employees, to make sure that they get access to the PPP program. So they've taken some important steps to make sure that minority-owned businesses and smaller small businesses have access to them.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, audience, I am coming to you now. I have a list of questions here. You can keep putting them in. Let's see, Neil. I'm going to just start at the top with what looks like the most popular. Will the application for the second draw PPP come from the bank like the first PPP program, and when should we expect banks to have those applications ready?
Yeah, so first, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and the Treasury Department have to update the application form. They've been given instructions in this legislation to do so expeditiously. I don't think they needed instruction. They know the need that's out there, and I know they're working hard to put this together. And then banks will utilize that for that program. Earlier, you asked me about the number of changes, because while the changes that were made were important, they haven't fundamentally restructured the program. The hope is, in fact, the belief is that they're going to be able to use the vast amounts of the loan application and the guidance that was a part of the original PPP for these second draws. That should make it a lot easier for both the SBA, Treasury, and your lending institution to be able to get the program up and running.
Okay. I think that you answered this next question, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's confusing, so maybe you could answer it again. The earlier PPP applications used calendar year 2019 to determine the amount eligible for PPP. So, and then this person says, what period will be used for the new PPP applications?
Generally, it's going to be the same, though there is some ability. You'll essentially have a choice. You can choose let's assume you're not a seasonal employer. So for the sake of this explanation, you are not a seasonal employer. Then you can use the 12 months prior to applying for the second draw PPP, which would obviously be very inclusive of 2020, or you can elect to use 2019. So you might, assuming you have more employees and business was better, you might want to elect to use 2019 because you have more payroll costs in 2019. Conversely, if you're worried about the loan forgiveness on the back end, you want to avoid having a loan that ultimately you have to repay, maybe you'll apply for the smaller amount using 2020. If you're a seasonal employer, then you basically pick a 12-week window from February of 2019 to February of 2020 for purposes of calculating your loan amount.
Got it. This one is about the EIDL grant. If companies now get the amount of the EIDL grant returned to them, now that it's not part of the deducted from the PPP forgiveness, I guess they're asking how they get it back. How do you get the money back if you, I guess, already applied for forgiveness and the EIDL counted against you? I think that's what they're asking.
Yeah, and this is one of the unknown aspects of this. So, in the coming days, we're going to have to figure out between Treasury and the Small Business Administration how all of that works. So, it's pretty straightforward if you haven't already gotten your loan forgiven. But if you have gotten your loan forgiven, if you're kind of done with the original PPP, they're going to have to establish processes to resolve all of these issues.
Okay, so we don't know yet.
That's right.
If a business received PPP funding but has since permanently closed, are they eligible to apply for a second draw to cover debt obligations even though the business is closed?
Well, generally debt obligations aren't an allowable use of your PPP proceeds. And you wouldn't receive forgiveness for using the PPP proceeds for debt forgiveness. It may be possible if you were in operation, let's say February 15th of 2020, you close for a period and you're reopening, under as the same legal entity, that you might be able to access a second PPP. But I think based on what the questioner was asking, I'm not sure you could get a PPP loan if you have no plans of reopening and incurring those costs. You can't use it for existing debt forgiveness.
Right. Okay. This says that you need to show a 25% loss of income in the first 3 quarters to qualify for a PPP loan. Does that include any financial help from the federal government or state during that time? So I think they're asking if you received any kind of assistance, do you count that towards your income, and therefore would that offset your 25% loss?
Yeah, this is an issue that we're looking for clarity on as to what if it constitutes gross receipts for those purposes. So, if the aid pushes you over that threshold, this is something that obviously we'll look to get more clarity as we dig into this and as we see guidance coming out of the administration on that point. So I'm not prepared to say no, absolutely not yet, but I'm also not prepared to say yes, absolutely yes.
Okay. This person's asking about PPP loans under $150,000 being forgiven. I think that's a thing that it was decided they would automatically be forgiven. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of people refer to it as automatic forgiveness, but what the law says is that if you have a loan less than $150,000, then you have to be allowed to apply for forgiveness using a one-page form. And it's essentially very minimal information and an attestation that you complied with the requirements of the program, which will effectively operate as automatic forgiveness. I want to stress to people, if you have a loan less than $150,000, you still have to go through a process. It's just going to be a much more simplified process. One page, you fill it out, it's an attestation, and they should be able to expedite your loan forgiveness. But you still do have to request that loan forgiveness. So don't assume that it's been automatically forgiven, because that's not the case. You still have to go through a process. It's just going to be a lot easier.
Right. You still have to do the paperwork.
If there's one thing the government likes, it's paperwork, and we applaud them when they get the paperwork down to a page, but it's still paperwork.
And that would apply. Do we know if that $150,000 automatic forgiveness, which we know isn't really automatic, applies to the second draw as well?
It does.
Okay.
Although the form will end up being slightly different because you'll have to also attest to the 25% reduction. But yes, effectively yes.
Just out of curiosity, knowing what we know now, that a loan under $150,000 is automatically forgiven. Not automatically, I know, but it's easier to get forgiven. If you were applying for a second draw, is there a way you could just request a number that was less than $150,000 so that you knowingly would make the forgiveness process easier?
I suspect you probably could. You don't have to request and receive a full amount of the loan.
Right.
I suspect some people will potentially look to do that. Now, of course, you still have to meet the underlying requirements. For example, fewer than 300 employees, that shouldn't be a problem at $150,000, and the reduction in revenue. So I would warn people about thinking about trying to game the system and saying, well, they're not going to really check if it's that small of a loan. If they start seeing a lot of that, you do have to attest, and you will have to demonstrate the reduction in gross receipts. So, as they say, don't play games with the tax man.
Well, just to be clear, that really wasn't what I was suggesting.
No, I know.
But what I was thinking is, if you did the math and your numbers added up to $155,000, and you might say to yourself, you know what, I could save myself a lot of headache by applying for $149,000, and I'll just forget the rest of it. I just wondered if you could actually do that. You could ask for a
I suspect you can do that. I would work with your lender. And the example you just used, I would absolutely. It might not be worth the $6,000 of paperwork.
That was my question. Okay, so can self-employed individuals apply for a PPP for their businesses if they've been receiving PUA benefits, which
pandemic unemployment assistance?
Yeah.
So remember, independent contractors, the self-employed, qualified for the original PPP program. You also are eligible for the second draw PPP. You'll have to demonstrate the revenue reduction, so that continues to apply. Generally, you can't receive benefits for the same time period, but you probably will have some overlap in some different periods where you might be able to take advantage of both the PPP and be on PUA or come off of PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. So that's one of the things that if you are self-employed, you're going to want to take a look at. Remember, pandemic unemployment insurance was also extended in this package. It was extended through the middle of March, and in addition, they've restored a part of that additional weekly benefit. It used to be $600. You remember that $600 additional per week. That expired over the summer. From December 26th through mid-March, it'll be an extra $300 per week for those individuals who are on unemployment assistance.
Right. Okay, great. So, Neil, it's almost 2:45. It's 2:41, and we were supposed to end at 2:45, but we have a lot of questions. Are you able to stay till 3?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So, audience, we're going to stay till 3 so you can keep entering your questions. Neil, okay. First of all, just this person wants to say thank you to the Chamber for all of this hard work on this, so I feel like I want to share that with you. And they say they are very happy that 501c6 organizations are now eligible, but they have a lot of members who are 501c3 nonprofit members. Are they going to be eligible?
They are. 501c3s were eligible under the original Paycheck Protection Program. They remain eligible under the Reopen Program and are eligible under the second.
Great. This is, I'm surprised, wasn't the most common question because I've heard it so many times. If we use independent contractors rather than employees, can we get the new PPP?
No, that has not changed. So independent contractors are eligible to apply themselves for the PPP, as we discussed a moment ago, but you as an employer can't claim the payments to your independent contractor, your 1099 contractors as part of your loan application.
Now, I'm almost sure I asked you this question the last time we talked about this, but if you have 1099 contractors who work for your company, we know that you can't count them as payroll. But does the money that you pay them fall under any of the other allowable expenses? Like, if you know what I mean? Like, are there services or anything like that?
So it's certainly the case that they wouldn't have fallen under any of the prior allowable uses. I think we're going to need further clarity, on, for example, some of the essential business services, those accounting services. If maybe some of that is kind of captured under it, I would not assume that that's the case. I don't think that that's what they were intending. Certain that's not what they were intending with the legislation. So I wouldn't count on that. But this will be something that we'll be looking for further guidance and clarification on in the days ahead.
Okay. This person asks, if you didn't get a PPP loan last time because you didn't apply, will you be given preference over businesses applying for a second time?
There is some money set aside within the overall PPP program for first-time appliers. So there is, off the top of my head, I want to say it's like 30 or 35 billion. I would need to double check those numbers, but something around there that is set aside for first-time PPP applicants. So you won't necessarily get preference, but there is at least a pot of money that that is set aside for those first-time.
I know you don't know the answer probably to this, but if you had to guess, we're talking about these programs like they're two different things now, right? There's the first PPP and then the second PPP, but I'm guessing that the way it's going to be handled at the bank is there's going to be a PPP application and then it's going to say, did you already get one? Like, are you is there language that you think people need to be using when they go to the bank to say, I